Hi there, Jonathan Fields with Good Life Project. So my guest today is Jerry Colonna. Jerry is a former venture capitalist, and now in New York City, he is a business coach who works a lot of times with entrepreneurs, especially in the high-tech world, really exploring what makes them tick and how to build what they want to build in the world and also live a good life. So it's awesome hanging out with you, Jerry.
No, thanks for coming to see me.
So you have a really kind of a fascinating background. You started out on one side of the business, essentially finding interesting ideas or people and companies and helping put together the funding to allow their dreams to come true. Take me back a little bit. You know, what was that like? What was the experience of that?
To be a VC?
Yeah. Because I think there's a lot of glory, like the perception of sort of high-rolling glory, but I'm curious from the inside out.
It's all it is fun and no hard work.
Of course.
I think that it's a very creative and eclectic kind of field, and one of the things that I enjoyed the most about it was the fact that you could, in the morning, be thinking about life through the lens of a software company, in the afternoon be thinking about life through the lens of a media company, and that you're constantly sort of moving from interesting idea to interesting idea. But the other piece, and the piece that I really enjoyed the most about it, was the connection that would occur with the entrepreneur. And in some ways, I think I continue with that even today. It's a kind of deep, we're in this together, we're going to go build something kind of dialogue. And that remains the thing that I enjoyed the most, and it was the piece that I enjoyed the most even then.
What is it about entrepreneurs in particular that so intrigues you?
Well, who else is willing to risk everything to do the impossible? I mean, I have this idea. I'm going to build a website, and I'm going to knock out Barnes & Noble or Walmart. No, trust me, it'll work. I mean, it's kind of infectious, that kind of optimism. Hugh MacLeod, whom we were talking about before, and we both admire his work, has a great cartoon, so many, but one of my favorites is, "I'm not delusional, I'm an entrepreneur." I like people who are pathologically optimistic and delusional. I think they are revolutionary and they change the world.
And it seems like, especially in this day and age, we need those people more than ever.
Yeah, I think that I think that's a good point. I think that there's when we think about, I have kids who are 22, 20, 15, and I think about them coming of age and coming out into the world, and I think about everything that folks in their 20s have been through, between 9/11 and the economic collapse and almost electing Romney. That's a joke. There's enough chaos that they've had to go through that I'm not at all surprised that they are looking at the world a little differently and demanding of the world something different. And you take that underlying view that work is somehow supposed to create something more meaningful, and you marry that with that entrepreneurial delusional state, and you get this really interesting stew of people who want to change the world ultimately because they want to make the world a better place. I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs and workshops, and I'll often ask people, why did you start this business? Mostly to reconnect them with that feeling in the first place. And I've yet to run into somebody who says, so that I can make a lot of money. They are all out there trying to change the world because they want to create more meaning.
Which is interesting, because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and he was writing about motivation in entrepreneurs. And he was saying to me, he said, I'm trying to figure this out. He said, it seems like most entrepreneurs start because, he was talking about the difference between push and pull motivation. They're pushed because there's a lot of scarcity and they're trying to make money, and then they get to a point where, they're fairly successful and they're not really, don't feel that anymore and they're missing the pull. And I said, I actually don't agree with that at all. I don't think most entrepreneurs start because they're trying to escape something. My experience on a personal level, and with people that I'm, in community with, is that it's much more about pull. Very often irrational, but, that's where the amazing things come from.
Well, I agree with you in that in my experience, it hasn't been about, and between being a VC and being a coach, I've worked with entrepreneurs now for about 25 years almost. It's not really about being responding to the scarcity of money. Now, we all want security and safety. We want the means to pay our bills. We want to be able to put our kids through college. We want to be able to retire. We want not to worry.
Right.
Okay, but leave that to the side for a moment. Even delusional entrepreneurs want that. I think what people are really motivated by are a combination of things. And what do I mean by that? When I was 10, my father lost his job. And he'd spent 30 years working for the same company. He started when he was in high school, took a break, went off to war, came back, and the company closed down. And, my father was in his 40s, probably about the same age as I am now. And it marked me, that experience, because it made me realize I could not count on anything. Now, I could have responded to the world with that view in a completely neurotic way,
right,
or I could have responded to it in a constructive way. And in some cases, I've been neurotic about it, in some cases, or negative about it, or destructive about it, in some cases, constructive about it. But that basic structure set in place a whole series of career choices that include, why do I work in an office by myself? Right? Because I can trust me.
Right.
So I think it's push or pull. I think there may be, just like we're always taught in sort of self-awareness work, that there's a shadow side to things, just as there's the light side of things. There's a shadow side to a lot of entrepreneurs. They're trying to prove their parents wrong or prove them right.
Yeah.
They're trying to fill a hole, and they're trying to make up for a loss. And they're trying to create meaning. And they're trying to create something deeper, more powerful, more long-lasting.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years back seeing a study that was done of a couple thousand of the world's pentamillionaires.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked them what drove them. And hands down, the largest percentage of people were driven not by money, not by scarcity, or at least not overtly.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's there on some level.
Right.
But the thing that made them work like crazy, the thing that made them successful on the level that they actually generated a huge amount of cash for themselves, not that that's the definition of success, but was a deep, deep desire to solve some sort of mass problem, mm-hmm. or to create something, to make. Mm-hmm. Like they were makers or creators. They mm-hmm. wanted to bring something to life that didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge distinguishing factor mm-hmm. between these people that had been at least outwardly ultra successful. Mm-hmm. What's interesting, though, and we were having a little bit of this conversation before, is, you start to talk about entrepreneurs and how extraordinarily driven mm-hmm. They can be. And on the one hand, it allows you to potentially bring to life something very significant. Mm. On the other hand, there's potentially a large shadow side of entrepreneurship in terms of how it affects you personally.
That's right.
Talk to me a little bit about your exploration with that.
Well, I've done a lot of writing on this, and I've done a lot of workshops on this, and along the way, I've tell this story, and I use this notion of disappearing into the fire, which is the name of a blog post I did a few years back, and that phrase comes from a story I tell, which I've stolen from David White. And the story goes like this. There was an ancient Chinese potter who yearned his entire life to create the most exquisite glaze imaginable. And at the end of his life, deciding that his meaningful life was over, he walks into the kiln. And the next day, his assistants open up the kiln and take out the pots, and they're covered with the most exquisite glaze imaginable. And that's where the story ends. And when I tell this story, it's really easy to look at, pick whomever you want to make fun of, insurance salesmen, investment bankers, and say, look at how awful they are. They walk into the kiln. But we often walk into the kiln when we want to change the world.
Yeah.
Right? We often lose ourselves in that process. And so it's actually a very nuanced and complicated problem. I call it the problem of the potter. Because the potter is creating something exquisite. But he's attached his sense of self and his sense of meaning to the product, to the output.
Right.
And that's where I think he's really lost.
So, and I'm going to ask you a question that I think we both have a lot of answers to, but I'll ask it anyway. Why is that bad?
It's not necessarily bad. And it's not necessarily good. Right? That's the work.
Yeah.
You've got to look at your own life and you've got to say, what is the cost to you? Because there are going to be days when you should walk into the kiln. There are going to be days when you should be pulling all-nighters. If you're inventing something that is revolutionary and radical, it takes a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
It's too pat and too easy to say, oh, the good life consists of making sure that you're always going home at 5 o'clock. Right? When work is really powerfully meaningful for us, the distinction between work and life starts to blur.
Yeah.
Right? So my advice is integration and consciousness. Know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And don't lose touch with those underlying motivations. Don't delude yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and that's so powerful. And I guess the question then becomes how?
Well, if I may, I turn to Buddhism. And not because I think Buddhism is a great religion and all that stuff. David White has another great line from a poem. I do not care if there's one God or many gods. I don't care what you believe about religion. But what's interesting is the power of noticing your own life. Like, wake up.
No.
Why are you doing what you're doing? You asked how. I think it starts with a kind of radical self-inquiry, a radical self-awareness. Who am I and why do I do what I do? Start there. So I think of Buddhism and I think of meditation. I know you have a practice as well. I think people who don't meditate think that meditation is about wiping the slate clean.
Yeah.
It's not.
Not at all.
Not at all, right? It's about seeing
clearly.
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And so if you can see it on the cushion, see it off the cushion. What are you doing? Why are you doing that? Do you really need to stay at 7, 8, 9? Do you really need to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to send that email?
Right. And sometimes the answer is yes.
Yes!
I mean, and that's what I think people beat themselves up over so
That's
much,
right.
is like the whole notion of, no, you shouldn't be. It's like you said, sometimes it does kind of suck, but enter it knowingly.
Yeah.
Understand what you're doing and why.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, that's what my practice has done for me, which has been huge, and it's just a very fundamental mindfulness practice. It's, Buddhist derived, is that it doesn't make everything all better.
No!
At all.
At all!
All it allows me to do is kind of zoom the lens out a little bit,
Right.
and maybe see a little bit more clearly
Or,
what's really happening.
Yeah, I like to say, or what it does is it puts you back in the driver's seat, not your amygdala, not your fearful brain, right? It puts you in charge of your life. So when you're working, I like to say, when you work, work. And when you're playing, playing. And when you're making love, make love. And don't conflate them. Don't think about sending the email when you're making love. It's kind of nutty.
But what's so this is fascinating though, right? Because you say a line like that, and you're like, oh, that's kind of funny. I guarantee there are going to be a lot of people watching this who have thought exactly that.
Yeah, well, you want a very practical, pragmatic test? This is another joke I stole from somebody, I don't even remember who. If the first thing you touch in the morning is not yourself or your partner, you got a problem, right? And I say that in a workshop, and they all laugh because they know the first thing that they're touching is their phone for their email.
Right.
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Now, sometimes the phone rings, and it's an emergency. That is true. But it's so rare. Versus how many times is that the first thing that you reach for in the morning?
Yeah.
Just that simple little practice point.
And it's a starting point.
It's a starting point.
Yeah. It's interesting for me. The first thing I do every morning, I roll out of bed and I sit for 25 minutes.
Beautiful.
But
But
I use a timer,
On
a
your
meditation timer on my iPhone. So every
pull,
morning
and
there's
the
a
pull.
battle.
Yeah.
I'm like, don't hit it, don't hit email, don't go
well,
straight
if I
to
look
the
and
timer.
nobody else
Right.
sees, does it
You're
really
like,
count?
I'll just check, but I won't respond to anything.
Right.
I'll just scan quickly, and
Right.
it never works. Ever works.
Right.
So it's fascinating to me because actually I like the thing. I like the chimes that I get from it.
Yeah.
And in an odd way, I kind of look at it as that's part of my daily practice.
Yes, the struggle with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so it starts the day in this really interesting way of making me mindful of the fact that I need to make decisions.
Yes. Yes.
Consciously and deliberately. And
I
some days I lose.
I think that struggle that you go through, and even the acceptance of the fact that sometimes you lose, that struggle puts you in the now. You know, what did Ram Dass say? Be here now, not later, now. Right? So you ask, like, how do you deal with this? Start with being here now. Right? Even if the now is a struggle.
Let's talk more about technology and how it interacts with that. Because I just gave you one example.
Sure.
But and you threw out that thing the first thing you reach out to. But fundamentally, the level of connectedness that we have right now, the level of always on. I think it was funny. Years ago when I got my first BlackBerry, the first thing I did was I called my friend to figure out how to turn off all the push notifications. So it never gave me anything until I looked for it. And then I took off the little thing that said, like send remotely from my BlackBerry when that was still a thing.
Yeah.
And the reason was I didn't want anyone to know that I had this newfangled device because then they'd think that they could reach me all the time. Now it's just automatically assumed that everybody has one of these, and that the expectation is that you are always connected, and the level of notifications that come through, it's classic intermittent reinforcement. It literally creates addictive patterns. We get little dopamine bursts in our brain just hearing or feeling the little zzz. And on the one hand, I look at a lot of technology and I'm like, this is flattening the world. This is connecting us to people that we wouldn't have been connected with, and it's expanding our global, experience and understanding of people. But on the other hand, I wonder if a lot of connectivity is doing a huge disservice by literally almost, creating, literally rewiring our brains in a way that makes us almost addicted to the need to have to keep reconnecting.
A couple of responses. The first is I completely resonate with your notion, with your observations about what happens and the addictive quality of it. And there's a lot of literature about the brain chemistry and what happens with it. A couple of responses. One is, so when the Buddha was walking the earth, we didn't have BlackBerries and we didn't have email and we didn't have iPhones. And yet, for 2,500 years we've been talking about the chattering monkey mind. I think the phenomena may be differently manifested because of technology, but the real underlying problem is actually part and parcel of being human. And recognizing that means that we have a responsibility. This is a very important tool. We have a very important tool called fire. We have to use it responsibly. We have a very powerful tool in these technologies. We still have to use them responsibly. I think it's that sense of responsibility to ourselves, to our community, to each other, that gets lost in the fascination with the gadgets. Yeah. And I've been on email. I had my first MCI mail account in 1987. So I get it. And I'm one of the fastest repliers on emails on the planet. And I'm very aware of that pull. But as much as I possibly can, I let it go.
No. I think also, and I'm sure we've talked about this a little bit before, part of the pull feels like, and I think especially for entrepreneurs, that if you're not responding, you're not doing something.
Well, I once had a client actually say to me, if I'm not panting, I feel like I'm not working. So I think the root, I think there is an addictive quality to it, and I think that there is this profound society-wide sense of fear of missing out.
Yeah,
that is a correlated challenge to this hyper-connectedness that we exist in. I think for entrepreneurs, there's a particular nasty version of this virus, if you will, which is that, and oh, by the way, if I miss that email, my company will fail, and if my company will fail, I will be a shit,
right,
and I will end up penniless and homeless and laughed at and humiliated. And that just makes the urgency that much more poignant and tragic.
So, I mean, when you think about trying to build something in this day and age, and the speed, the expectation of speed, how do you touch stone while also trying to build something real and meaningful in the world? I mean, the practice is one of them. So we talked about meditation and mindfulness. Yeah. Is there more?
Well, if you broaden the definition of practice, as I like to do, right, because you're a yoga practitioner, you're a meditator, you know that it's all about off the mat and off the cushion, right? How many times a day can you meditate? Well, how many breaths do you take? Right? There are a million things that you can do. Most involve stopping. Most involve standing still. Right? Stop. Pause. Now go. Stop. Stand still. Pause. Go. Just pause. I think you start to interrupt the circuitry, which is faster, 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 faster.
Yeah. I remember speaking once, and I was talking about my practice, and somebody said to me, how can you be, the sitting practice is one thing, but it's really about just bringing awareness to the moment you open your eyes and the moment you close your eyes. And I thought a great app, actually, it's always like, how do we leverage technology to be more present, which is a little bit bizarre, but I'm kind of curious about that overlay. I thought it'd be interesting to take an app and just set it to randomly vibrate for a split second at random times throughout the day. And that would be a signal to you to just stop for a moment and observe, okay, where am I? How do I feel? Is there one that does that?
Yeah, in fact, it has a Tibetan singing bell, and a variety of them. Matt Stinchcomb, who's a good friend of mine, works at Etsy, has it on his phone. It's lovely. I have it on my phone. We'll sit, we'll talk, all of a sudden, bing, and we just stop. Thich Nhat Hanh would do this all the time on his retreats, where there's just a bell, and everybody just stops. And then you go on.
So what if you did that on an organizational level?
I think it's very powerful. I think one of the things I do in my workshops is I try to make people laugh. I ask them if they've, when was the last time they spent the entire day without going to the bathroom? You'd be surprised. How about drinking some water? How about going to get some lunch? Right? So on an organizational basis, you can sort of say, and you start to feel a little bit of this when we have all hands meetings, just more work.
Right.
Or we have, the joint lunch. But imagine grabbing the buffet lunch and hanging out together for a few minutes rather than actually going back to your desk. Imagine taking a walk. Everybody in the company. Come on, let's go for a walk. Wow, what a waste of time. Around the block once. Right? More oxygen, more productivity, smarter thinking, better cognitive ability.
So on an organizational level, it seems like these things are actually, or organizations are actually becoming more open to this. I mean, at least from what I've seen in my work, a lot of my last book was around ideas that, or strategies or skills that allow people to move into this place of uncertainty where you have to be to create good things. And a lot of that, one fundamental practice is what we've been talking about here. But I think the interesting thing to me is that very often the hook for these things that we're talking about that are more about living a more present, engaged life is its relationship to performance, which we now have increasing mounds of science that show. I'm curious whether you've had conversations around sort of like that angle of developing.
I have through work with people like Mind and Life Institute and the work I do at Naropa, but with my clients, for the most part, they wouldn't use this term, but what they're really just seeking is peace of mind. They're not even as drawn in, and I agree with you, the productivity enhancements are there. I agree with you.
Function, creativity.
Increase That's great. They just want to be able to go to sleep at night.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll come into my office, they'll sit on the couch, and they will cry. I mean, that's how painful it can be. And they just want some relief. So when I offer this stuff and it creates some relief for them, that's motivation enough. Then what they find is that the team starts actually interacting better, everybody starts being better, and then they get interested in the other stuff. So
yeah, I think it's a big awakening to step back and actually acknowledge the fact that some of the greatest doing comes from not doing.
Yeah. Wisdom of no
It's
action.
just so counterintuitive, I think, for a Western mindset.
Right.
But so powerful once you, and I think you can actually explain it to somebody. That you just have to,
Experience
once they
it.
experience it,
Yeah.
then it makes sense. But until then, it's just chatter.
I hear you.
You mentioned your role at Naropa.
Yes.
I'd love to know a little bit more about that.
Well, Naropa is the only fully accredited Buddhist-inspired university in North America, and it's really dedicated to bringing mindfulness and contemplative practice into education. We're about to celebrate our 40th anniversary, and I was just elected chair of the board. And as I am very, very happy to say all the time, the world needs Naropa. The world needs a place where people can complete their process of becoming adult, finding their place in the world, but to do it in a way that's supportive and very much in keeping with the themes that we've been talking about today. So.
The name of this project is A Good Life Project. And it was interesting, we had a quick conversation before we started filming this about the difference between the good life and a good life.
Right.
When I use the phrase a good life, to live a good life, what comes up for you?
The word that pops to mind is integration. Integrating the wholeness of who we are. Learning that even within our choices, we can create a wholeness that is a fully integrated reflection of our wishes, our dreams, our values, the way we want to manifest in the world. It has very little to do with material goods. It has very little to do with the right job per se, as much as it has to do with the right experience. The notion of right livelihood. So, right, that's my definition.
I love that. It's beautiful. Well, I thank you so much for your time and your insights today. It's been a great conversation.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. My guest today has been Jerry Colonna. I'm Jonathan Field, signing off for A Good Life Project.